This is yet another account from Father Thomas Cardoso, one of the few priests authorized by the Vatican to perform exorcisms. What you are about to hear is one of the most disturbing cases of his career, a case that unfortunately ended in death and police involvement, a case that kept him away from practicing exorcisms for years. Proceed only if you are psychologically and emotionally capable of dealing with real and frightening facts.
My name is Thomas Cardoso. I am a priest, and during my journey I learned that evil exists in ways most people could never imagine. I also learned that it doesn't always manifest with screams or blasphemies. Sometimes evil whispers, sometimes it cries. It was a Tuesday when I received the call. The voice on the other end of the line trembled so much that it could barely form complete sentences. A desperate man begging for help. His wife was possessed, he said. Doctors couldn't do anything. I should have hung up. I should have advised that man to seek proper psychiatric help, but something in the urgency of that voice made me hesitate. A few days later, I was driving down a dirt road, surrounded by a dense fog that seemed to swallow the daylight. The town was small, forgotten by time, with old houses and deserted streets. The GPS stopped working miles before my destination. The feeling of being watched began there, on that empty road, where even the birds seemed to have abandoned the place. When I finally found the house, my stomach clenched. It was an old construction, of dark wood stained by humidity. The windows were covered from the inside with dirty sheets, and the garden had turned into a tangle of tall, thorny weeds. Even before I turned off the engine, I noticed the silence. There was no wind, there were no insects, just a heavy, suffocating silence, as if the house itself was holding its breath. I grabbed my briefcase with the sacramental instruments and walked to the door. My hands were clammy. I knocked 3 times. The man who opened the door had sunken eyes, surrounded by purple dark circles. His face was covered by a poorly shaven beard, and his clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in days. He smelled of sweat and despair. "Father Thomas," he whispered, glancing quickly around before pulling me inside. "Thank God you came. Thank God." The door closed behind me with a sound that echoed through the empty house, and it was at that moment, standing in that dark hallway, that I felt it for the first time. Something was wrong, deeply wrong, but I still didn't know that the real horror was only just beginning. The man introduced himself as Roberto. His hands trembled as he locked the door with 2 bolts and a thick chain. I noticed he checked 3 times to make sure everything was properly secured. Inside, the house was even more disturbing than outside. The curtains blocked almost all natural light, creating a constant gloom. The air was stale, heavy with a smell of mold, mixed with something sweet and sickening that I couldn't identify. Roberto guided me to the living room. There were dirty dishes piled on the table, glasses with half-empty liquids, medicines scattered everywhere. The walls had strange marks, as if someone had dragged their nails across the paint. He offered me water, which I accepted more out of courtesy than thirst. As I drank, I observed his hands. They were covered in fresh scratches, some still with scabs of dried blood. "Sorry about the mess, Father," he said, running his hands over his face. I haven't been able to keep things in order. I haven't slept properly in weeks." I sat on the sofa and asked him to tell me everything from the beginning. Roberto took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to relive each moment. He told me that his wife, Marina, had always been a kind and loving woman. She worked as a teacher, loved to cook, tended the garden with dedication. They were happy, he assured me. There were no problems in their marriage. But a few months ago, something changed. Marina started having severe insomnia. She would wake up in the middle of the night and stand by the bedroom window staring at nothing. When he asked what was wrong, she didn't answer. Then came the headaches, migraines so severe they made her vomit. Doctors ran every possible test, MRIs, CT scans, blood tests, nothing, absolutely nothing wrong. That's when the violence began. Marina broke all the mirrors in the house in a single night. She threw dishes against the walls. She screamed nonsense, words Roberto swore he had never heard before. Doctors diagnosed schizophrenia. They prescribed heavy medication, but nothing worked. The situation only got worse. Roberto stopped talking and looked at the dark hallway leading to the bedrooms. His eyes filled with tears. "I had to tie her up, Father," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She tried to attack me with a knife. She tried to throw herself out the window. I had no choice. I couldn't let her hurt herself or me." He wiped his tears with the back of his hand and continued. "Marina had been tied to the bed in the back room for days. She no longer ate. She barely drank water. She just cried for hours and hours without stopping. The doctors wanted to institutionalize her," Roberto said. "But I knew it wasn't mental illness, Father. I knew there was something more, something medicine can't explain." I remained silent for a moment, processing everything. The story was disturbing, but not uncommon. I had seen similar cases that, in the end, were just severe psychiatric illnesses. But then Roberto said something that chilled my blood. "She knows things, Father, things no one should know. She told me about my father's death, described every detail, and I had never talked about it with her. Never." He stood up and walked to the hallway, stopping at the entrance. The darkness beyond him seemed solid, impenetrable. "She's in the back room," he said without looking at me. "But before you go in, you need to be prepared. What's in there is no longer the woman I knew." I picked up my briefcase and stood. My heart was beating faster now. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low, muffled sound coming from the back of the hallway. Someone was crying. I followed Roberto down the hallway. Each step I took on the old wooden floor produced a sharp creak that echoed through the walls. The light was almost non-existent there, only a few faint rays escaping from under the closed doors. The crying grew louder as we advanced. It wasn't a hysterical or violent cry. It was deep, loaded with a sadness so pure it seemed to tear something inside the chest of whoever heard it. Roberto stopped before the last door. His hand hesitated over the doorknob, visibly trembling. He looked at me with pleading eyes, as if expecting me to change my mind and leave. But I just nodded. He turned the doorknob slowly. The door opened with a prolonged groan, revealing a room plunged into shadows. The windows were covered with blankets nailed to the wall. The air inside was dense, almost solid, laden with that sweet smell I now recognized. It was the smell of sweat, urine, and something else. Something putrid. In the center of the room, there was a bed, and on it, a small, fragile figure, tied by the wrists and ankles with thick ropes. Marina. She had her back to us, her body shaking with sobs. Her hair, which must have been long and well-maintained, was now tangled and dirty, spread across the pillow like black roots. "Marina," Roberto called softly. "The priest is here. He came to help us." "Marina," Roberto called softly. "The priest is here. He came to help us." She didn't answer. She just kept crying, her face turned to the wall. I entered the room and placed my briefcase on an old dresser. I opened it and began to take out the objects. The silver crucifix, the holy water, the Roman ritual. My hands moved by instinct, following procedures I had performed before. But something was different. Something in the air of that room made my skin crawl. I approached the bed slowly. Roberto stood at the door, as if afraid to fully enter. "Marina," I said in a firm but gentle voice, "my name is Father Thomas. I came here to help you. Can you hear me?" The crying stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It was a heavy, expectant silence, as if the room itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Slowly, very slowly, Marina turned her head towards me. Slowly, very slowly, Marina turned her head towards me. Her face was pale, almost grey. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying so much. But what disturbed me was not her appearance, it was the expression. She looked at me with a terror so deep, so absolute, that for a moment I thought I would faint. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. There was a cloth gag tied over her mouth. "She bites," Roberto explained from behind me. "Bites herself until she bleeds. I had to do it." I looked at Marina again. Tears silently streamed down her face. She shook her head from side to side, as if trying to tell me something. Her eyes pleaded. I picked up the crucifix and began the first prayer. My voice echoed through the room, reciting words in Latin I had memorized long ago. That's when it happened. That's when it happened. The temperature in the room dropped drastically. My breath became visible in the air. The shadows in the corners seemed to thicken, to move, as if they were alive. And Marina began to tremble violently. I continued praying, raising my voice. I sprinkled holy water on her. The drops fell on her skin and she writhed, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't the reaction of something evil being burned by the sacred. It was the reaction of someone in absolute panic. I paused for a moment, confused. Something wasn't right. In all the cases I had witnessed, there were clear signs. Blasphemies, superhuman strength, aversion to sacred objects. But Marina just cried and looked at me with those pleading eyes. That's when I heard the sound. It came from somewhere in the house, a slow dragging, as if something heavy was being pulled across the floor. It stopped, then it started again, closer. Roberto heard it too. He quickly turned to the hallway, his face pale. Roberto heard it too. He quickly turned to the hallway, his face pale. "What was that?" he whispered. No one answered. The sound stopped again, but now there was something else. A different smell in the air, metallic, like fresh blood. And then from the dark hallway came a whisper, so low I almost thought I had imagined it. My name. Someone had whispered my name. The whisper did not repeat. Only that dense, suffocating silence returned to dominate the house. Roberto was paralyzed at the door, his eyes fixed on the dark hallway. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. I didn't answer. My attention was divided between the hallway and Marina, who was now watching me with a disturbing intensity. Her eyes seemed to scream something her gagged mouth could not. I returned to the ritual. Perhaps it was just nerves, the tension of the environment. Old houses make strange noises. The wind can create sound illusions. I needed to concentrate. I resumed the prayers, this time with more fervor. I held the crucifix over Marina and recited the words of expulsion. My voice echoed through the walls, firm and authoritative, but she didn't react. There were no screams, there was no resistance, just that silent crying that streamed down her face and that desperate look that pierced me. I continued for minutes that felt like hours. I sprinkled more holy water. I invoked the sacred names. I commanded any evil entity to manifest itself and reveal its presence. Nothing. Marina just trembled and cried, her eyes never leaving mine. That's when the bedroom door closed by itself. That's when the bedroom door closed by itself. The sound was dry, definitive. Roberto jumped aside, startled. He ran to the door and tried to open it. The doorknob turned, but the door didn't move, as if something on the other side was holding it. "It's locked," he said, his voice rising an octave. "Father, the door is locked." My heart raced, but I maintained my composure. Doors can stick. Old wood expands with humidity. There were rational explanations. "Calm down," I said. "Let's finish the ritual first." Roberto moved away from the door, but didn't stop looking at it. His hands were trembling uncontrollably now. I returned my attention to Marina. I placed my hand on her forehead. It was ice cold, damp with cold sweat. She closed her eyes tightly and more tears streamed down. "In the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit," I began, "I command any impure spirit inhabiting this body to manifest itself and—" A violent crash interrupted my words. A violent crash interrupted my words. It came from the hallway, as if someone had knocked something heavy over. Then another sound. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, walking down the hallway on the other side of the door. Roberto pressed his back against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. "There's no one else in the house," he whispered. "Father, there's no one else here." The footsteps stopped before the bedroom door. I could see the shadow of something blocking the sliver of light under the door. Something was there, standing, waiting. The silence that followed was unbearable. My heart pounded against my ribs. I clutched the crucifix tighter, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. Then the doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately, as if whoever was on the other side wanted us to know they were there. The door remained locked. The doorknob turned, but the door didn't open. It turned one way, then the other. The metal creaked with the movement. Roberto was almost hyperventilating now. I positioned myself between him and the door, the crucifix raised. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice sounding firmer than I actually felt. "In the name of Jesus Christ, identify yourself." The doorknob stopped turning. The silence returned, but now it was different. It was a living, pulsing silence, as if the house itself was breathing. And then I heard it again, that whisper, clearer this time, coming from behind the door. "Thomas." My name, pronounced in a voice that was not human. It was multiple, overlaid, as if several voices spoke at once. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hands began to tremble. That's when I felt something touch my shoulder. I turned sharply. It was Roberto, but his face was transfigured by absolute panic. He pointed at something behind me. I looked where he pointed and felt my stomach churn. I looked where he pointed and felt my stomach churn. On the wall above Marina's bed, where there had been nothing before, there were now words, written in something dark that seeped through the peeling paint. They were not Portuguese words. They were not in any language I recognized. But somehow, I knew what they meant. "He is here." Marina was writhing on the bed now, trying to free herself from the ropes. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the door. She shook her head violently, trying to scream through the gag. The temperature continued to drop. My breath formed dense clouds in the air. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to expand, slowly advancing across the walls. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard something that chilled my blood. Laughter. Low, guttural, multiple, as if there was a multitude on the other side of that door, laughing at us. Roberto fell to his knees, his hands covering his ears. He was muttering disconnected prayers, his voice choked by terror. I knew I had to do something. I had to regain control of the situation. But for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never felt during an exorcism. True fear. Because something was wrong. Deeply wrong. And I still didn't know what. The laughter stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even worse. And then the room light flickered. Once. Twice. The third time, it went out completely, plunging us into absolute darkness. The darkness was total. I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face. I could only hear Roberto's ragged breathing somewhere beside me, and the muffled sound of Marina struggling in the bed. I fumbled through the dresser until I found my briefcase. My trembling fingers searched for my cell phone. The light from the screen, when I turned it on, was faint, but enough to reveal the room in distorted shadows. Roberto was huddled in the corner, his eyes closed, praying compulsively. Marina continued to writhe, desperately trying to free herself from the ropes that bound her. I needed to finish this. I needed to cast out whatever was in that house. I approached the bed again, the crucifix in one hand and my cell phone in the other. The flickering light illuminated Marina's face, and what I saw there made me hesitate. It wasn't hatred, it wasn't malice, it was pure terror. "I will continue the ritual," I announced, more to myself than to the others. "In the name of..." The door burst open. It wasn't a gradual movement. It was instantaneous, violent, as if something had ripped it from its hinges. It slammed against the wall with a crash that made the entire room shake. The hallway beyond was black, a darkness denser than that of the room, as if it were made of solid matter, and from that darkness something moved. I couldn't see clearly. They were shapes, shadows that writhed and glided, but something was there, something that shouldn't exist. Roberto screamed, a high-pitched primal scream of pure animal terror. I raised the crucifix towards the door and began to recite the exorcism ritual with all the strength I had. My voice echoed, firm and authoritative, commanding the entity to reveal itself and abandon that place. The shadows in the hallway seemed to recede for a moment. I felt a wave of hope. Perhaps it would work. Perhaps I could cast it out. But then Marina began to struggle with an impossible strength for her frail body. The ropes that bound her snapped under the tension. She arched her back, her entire body convulsing. I ran to her, pressing the crucifix against her forehead. She writhed, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't repulsion to the sacred object. It was desperation, as if she was trying to tell me something, as if she was pleading. "Manifest yourself," I shouted. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to reveal your name and abandon this body." Marina shook her head violently. Her eyes were wide, fixed on mine, pleading. And then I realized she was trying to speak, trying to say something through the gag. I looked at Roberto, who was still huddled in the corner, paralyzed by fear. Then I looked at Marina again. I made a decision. "I will remove the gag," I announced, "so that the demon can reveal its name and accept the commands of the church." Roberto did not respond. He was in shock, his eyes glazed over. Roberto did not respond. He was in shock, his eyes glazed over. With trembling hands, I reached for Marina's gag. She stopped struggling immediately, as if waiting for it. Her eyes pleaded with me. I untied the cloth and removed it from her mouth. She gasped, desperately sucking in air. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. For a moment she just breathed, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then she spoke. Her voice was hoarse, broken, but perfectly human. "Father," she whispered, and there was so much relief in that word that my heart ached. Thank God you took it off." I frowned, confused. I raised the crucifix again. "Reveal your name, demon. I command that—" "No!" she interrupted, her voice rising in desperation. "Father, please, listen to me, listen to me." Tears streamed down her face. She pulled at the ropes that still bound her wrists, trying to free herself. "It's not me," she said, her voice breaking. "Father, I'm not the one who's possessed. It's him. It's Roberto." The world stopped. I looked at her, then at Roberto in the corner of the room. He had raised his head, and he was smiling. It wasn't a human smile. It was too wide. The corners of his mouth stretched impossibly. His eyes, which had previously been glazed with fear, now shone with something different. Malice. "He locked me in here weeks ago," Marina continued quickly, desperately. "He changed, Father. Something entered him. He's no longer my husband. He tortures me. He—" "Shut up," Roberto said. His voice was different now, deeper, multiple, the same voice that had whispered my name from the other side of the door. He slowly stood up, and I noticed something in his hand, something that gleamed in the faint cell phone light. A knife. A large kitchen knife with a blade stained with rust or dried blood. A knife. A large kitchen knife with a blade stained with rust or dried blood. "You shouldn't have taken off the gag, Father," he said, still smiling that impossible smile. "Now she's ruined everything." My body reacted before my mind. I placed myself between Roberto and the bed, the crucifix raised. "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command that—" Roberto laughed, a deep, guttural laugh that echoed through the walls. "Your tricks don't work on me, Father," he said, taking a step forward. "Not here, not in this house." The knife blade reflected the cell phone light. He twirled it between his fingers with disturbing skill. "I was going to make it look like an accident," he continued, advancing slowly. "I was going to say she killed herself, that you tried to save her but couldn't. But now..." He tilted his head unnaturally, his neck bones cracking. "Now I'll have to kill both of you. Now I'll have to kill both of you." Marina screamed behind me. She pulled at the ropes with desperate strength, trying to free herself. Roberto advanced. I threw holy water at him. The drops hit his face, but he just laughed louder. There were no burns. There was no reaction. "Water doesn't hurt me, Father," he said, wiping his face with his free hand. "Words don't hurt me, but this knife..." He raised the blade. "This knife will hurt a lot." And then he lunged at me. I dodged at the last second. The blade passed so close to my face that I felt the displacement of air. Roberto, or whatever was inside him, spun with impossible agility and attacked again. I used my briefcase as a shield. The knife embedded itself in the old wood with a dull thud. I seized the moment as he pulled the blade out and pushed with all my strength. Roberto staggered backward, but didn't fall. That horrifying smile was still plastered on his face. "Run, Father!" Marina screamed behind me. "Get out of here! Get help!" But I couldn't leave her. I couldn't abandon that tied-up, defenseless woman with that thing. Roberto advanced again, this time slower, savoring the moment. His eyes had something wrong with them. His pupils were too dilated, occupying almost the entire iris. And there was something else, something moving within them, like shadows swimming in dark water. "You know what's funny, Father?" he said, his voice oscillating between deep and high tones. "She really thought I was going to get help, that I would call a priest to save her, that some part of her imbecile and devoted husband was still around trying to help her while I tortured her and let her die slowly." He laughed, and the sound sent shivers down my spine. I asked why he had called me, how my presence could help him in his atrocities. And the answer was even more frightening. "I didn't call you to save her. I called you because I needed to see people accuse a fanatic priest of being irresponsible. A man who let a sick woman kill herself. A man who, instead of recommending medical help, wanted to impose his cheap witchcraft in the name of God. And then, Father, people would doubt your faith. That's called politics." The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Everything had been a trap by the father of lies from the beginning. "You were going to use me to justify her death," I said, my voice coming out firmer than I expected. Roberto clapped slowly, the knife still in his other hand. "Nothing personal, Father, and you even made things more fun. The way you pray holding these symbolic toys is commendable. But now we need to end this." He took another step forward. "Now both of you need to die, Father, so I can explain to everyone how irresponsible you were in untying her from the bed, even though I told you not to, since she was only sick, and how she killed you next and committed suicide, without me being able to stop her." I quickly looked around, searching for something, anything I could use as a weapon. The dresser. If I could knock it over, maybe I would gain enough time to untie Marina and flee. But Roberto was fast. Too fast. He lunged at me again, and this time I couldn't completely dodge. The blade tore my cassock, cutting my arm. I felt the sharp pain, the heat of blood trickling down. I fell to my knees, clutching the wound. Roberto stood over me, the knife raised, ready for the final blow. That's when Marina succeeded. That's when Marina succeeded. With a final desperate tug, she freed one of her hands. The rope had worn through with her constant efforts. She reached for the lamp on the nightstand and hurled it with all her might. The object hit Roberto in the head. He staggered, disoriented, bringing his free hand to his forehead. When he removed it, there was blood. I seized the moment. I stood up and ran to the bed, beginning to untie the other ropes that bound Marina. My fingers trembled, slipping on the blood that dripped from my arm. "Hurry, Father," she pleaded. "He'll recover." And she was right. Roberto was already getting up, shaking his head. Blood streamed down his face, but he didn't seem to feel pain, only rage. I managed to untie Marina's other hand. She immediately began to work on the ropes on her ankles. Roberto advanced again, but this time he tripped over something. The briefcase I had dropped. He fell face down, and the knife slipped from his hand, sliding across the wooden floor. "The knife!" I shouted. Marina and I lunged at the same time. She was closer. Her fingers touched the handle first, but Roberto was faster. He grabbed her ankle, still bound by the rope, and pulled with brutal force. Marina screamed, losing her balance. The knife fell from her hand and slid towards me. I picked it up, the cold, heavy metal in my palm. Roberto was on Marina now, his hands around her neck. She struggled, scratching his face, but he wouldn't let go. That horrifying smile was still there, even as she fought for air. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran and plunged the knife into Roberto's back. I didn't think. I just acted. I ran and plunged the knife into Roberto's back. He let out a scream. It wasn't human. It was multiple, overlaid, as if 1,000 voices screamed at once. He recoiled from Marina, staggering, trying to reach the knife embedded between his shoulder blades. Marina coughed, desperately sucking in air. I finished untying her ankles and helped her up. "The door!" I said. "Let's go!" We ran to the hallway, but Roberto, even with the knife in his back, followed us. He moved strangely now, spasmodically, as if his body wasn't responding correctly. "You won't escape," he snarled, his voice increasingly inhuman. "This house is mine. You are mine." We ran through the dark hallway. Marina was weak, barely able to stand. I held her, practically carrying her. We reached the living room. The front door was right there with its bolts and chains. But when I tried to open it, I realized it was locked from the outside. Impossible. But when I tried to open it, I realized it was locked from the outside. Impossible. "The window!" Marina screamed. We ran to the living room window. I tore off the sheet that covered it and tried to open it. It was stuck, the wood swollen with humidity. Behind us, Roberto entered the room. The knife was still embedded in his back. Blood streamed down his shirt, but he didn't seem to care. "There's no way out," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "There's no escape." I grabbed a chair and hurled it against the window. The glass exploded into 1,000 pieces. The fresh night air flooded the room. "Jump!" I yelled to Marina. She hesitated for only a second before throwing herself out the window. I heard her fall on the other side, groaning in pain but alive. Roberto lunged at me before I could follow her. We fell to the floor, rolling. His hands found my neck and squeezed. The strength was superhuman. I couldn't breathe. My vision began to darken at the edges. The strength was superhuman. I couldn't breathe. My vision began to darken at the edges. With the last shred of strength, I reached for the handle of the knife still embedded in his back and twisted it. Roberto let out a deafening scream and released me. I took the opportunity to crawl away, scrambling towards the window. That's when I heard it. Sirens, distant but approaching quickly. Someone must have called for help, perhaps due to my absence. I never go to exorcisms without informing people from my parish, as I know the risks. Roberto heard them too. His head spun towards the sound, and for the first time I saw something beyond malice in his eyes. Fear. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He staggered towards the hallway, but his legs gave out. He fell to his knees, his body finally succumbing to his wounds. The sirens grew louder. Blue and red lights began to illuminate the room through the broken window. I managed to get up and drag myself to the window. Outside, Marina was in the garden, waving desperately at the arriving police cars. I looked back one last time. Roberto was lying on the floor of the room as if resting. Blood spread around him in a dark pool. And then I heard his voice. Faint, but still multiple. "This doesn't end here, Father. It never ends." Police stormed the house, shouts of command, heavy footsteps. Someone helped me out the window. Outside, paramedics were already attending to Marina. she was alive, bruised, traumatized, but alive. More police entered the house. I heard screams from inside, then gunshots, 3 shots, dry, definitive. Then silence. A police officer came out the front door, his face pale. "He attacked us," he explained to his superior. "We had no choice. He had a knife. He kept advancing." I sat on the garden ground, trembling. My arm was bleeding. My throat hurt where Roberto had squeezed it. But I was alive. Marina was taken away in an ambulance. Before leaving, she looked at me through the vehicle's window. Her eyes said it all. "Thank you. You saved me. You believed in me." I was taken to another ambulance. As paramedics treated my injuries, I observed the house. It looked different now, with all the lights on and police coming and going, less threatening, just an old abandoned house. But I knew the truth. I had seen what was inside that man. I had felt its presence, and Roberto's last words echoed in my mind. "This doesn't end here. It never ends." I spent 3 days in the hospital. The physical injuries were not severe. A deep cut on my arm that needed stitches, bruises on my neck, various abrasions. Nothing that time wouldn't heal. But there were wounds that doctors couldn't see. They couldn't treat. Every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw that smile. That impossible smile, too wide, too wrong. And I heard that multiple voice, whispering my name in the darkness. Marina was admitted to a psychiatric ward, not because she was insane, but because she needed intensive care. Weeks of torture, malnutrition, and trauma had taken their toll. Doctors said she would physically recover. As for the rest, only time would tell. I visited her on the 2nd day. She was sitting in bed looking out the window. When she saw me, her eyes filled with tears. We talked for hours. She told me everything. How Roberto had gradually changed over months. Small things at first. Forgetfulness, mood swings, then strange behaviors. He would wake up in the middle of the night and stand in the dark, just watching her sleep. When she confronted him, he denied it. He said she was imagining things, and then he started to isolate her. He convinced her to quit her job. He alienated her from friends and family. He said it was for their own good, that the outside world was dangerous. When she tried to resist, the violence began. Not physical at first, psychological. He made her doubt herself, her sanity. He said she was going crazy, that she needed help. And then came the day he tied her up for the first time. He said it was to protect her from herself, that she had tried to hurt herself, but Marina knew the truth. She was perfectly sane. It was he who had changed. It was he who was possessed. "I tried to scream," she told me, her voice breaking. "I tried to ask for help, but he gagged me. And when you arrived, Father, I thought I would finally be saved. But then I realized he had planned everything, that there was another intention behind it." Tears streamed down her face. I held her hand. Tears streamed down her face. I held her hand. "You're safe now," I said. "He can't hurt you anymore." But even as I said it, a part of me wondered if it was true. Those last words kept echoing. "This doesn't end here. It never ends." The police conducted a full investigation. They found things in the house, disturbing things. A diary written by Roberto, but with handwriting that changed from page to page. Some entries were his, speaking of his love for Marina. Others were different, written in a language no one could identify. They also found marks on the basement walls, strange symbols drawn with blood. Animal blood, analysis revealed. Cats, dogs, birds, all killed in rituals no one could explain. Investigators concluded that Roberto had developed some severe psychosis, that he had gotten involved with occultism and lost touch with reality. To them, it was a case of mental illness, not demonic possession. But I knew differently. I had looked into the eyes of that thing. I had felt its presence. That was not mental illness. It was something much worse. On the third day I was discharged. I returned to my parish, but everything seemed different now. The prayers that once brought comfort now seemed empty. The words that once held power now sounded weak. Because for the first time in my life, I had failed. I had gone to perform an exorcism and almost caused the death of an innocent woman. I had been deceived, manipulated, and if it weren't for Marina's courage, if she hadn't managed to break free and throw that lamp, I would be dead. I started having nightmares. Every night, the same dream. I was back in that house, in that dark room. But this time, when I removed Marina's gag, it wasn't her who spoke. It was Roberto. And he laughed non-stop as I realized I had made a terrible mistake. I woke up sweating, my heart pounding, compulsively checking the doors and windows. I was afraid of the dark now, afraid of the silence. Because in the silence I heard that whisper of my name. I sought help. I talked to other priests, to more experienced exorcists. They told me it was normal, that cases like that left marks, that time would heal. But weeks passed, and the marks didn't disappear. If anything, they grew deeper. I returned to the house one last time. It was empty now, sealed by the police. I stood outside, looking at the dark windows, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something moving inside, a shadow moving from one room to another, a shadow moving from one room to another. I blinked, and there was nothing left. Just an old, empty house. But as I walked away, I felt that sensation again, the feeling of being watched. I looked back one last time, and there, in the window of the room where it all happened, I saw something that chilled my blood. A silhouette, standing, motionless, watching me. I ran to the car and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't look back again. Marina was discharged 2 weeks later. She went to live with her sister in another city, far from that house, far from those memories. We talked on the phone a few times. She was recovering slowly, going to therapy, trying to rebuild her life. But I could hear it in her voice, the same thing that was in mine, that residual fear, that feeling that something was still there, waiting in the shadows, because deep down, we both knew the truth. Roberto was dead. His body had been buried, but what was inside him, that presence, that thing, it hadn't died with him. It was still there, somewhere, waiting. And sometimes late at night, when everything is silent and dark, I still hear it, that whisper, and I know he was right. This doesn't end here. It never ends. So I made the decision I thought was wisest for someone who truly believes in God. I gathered a team of priest friends along with devout faithful from our parishes, and once a month we go to the house to pray. We remove the curtains, place crucifixes in the rooms, and some brethren even painted the basement, erasing the stains of occultism. We did this for several consecutive months until I truly felt that the evil had left that place. I thought about never performing exorcisms again, but I believe it is a task for a few, and as in any mission there are failures, difficulties, and surprises. To cower at the first adversity would be like turning away from God's purpose.
This story you just heard is one of the most disturbing accounts we have ever documented. The case of Father Thomas Cardoso and Marina reminds us of something fundamental. Evil does not always manifest the way we expect. Sometimes it hides behind familiar faces. Sometimes it uses our trust, our compassion, our beliefs against us. And the most terrifying thing of all, sometimes it wins. Marina survived, but she carries scars that will never completely disappear. Father Thomas continues his work, but he was never the same after that night, and the house where it all happened is still there, empty, waiting for the next one. Think about that for a moment. How many times have you trusted someone completely? How many times have you let someone into your life, into your home, without questioning? What if that person changed? What if something entered them, took control, and you only realized it when it was too late? What if at this very moment someone close to you is no longer who you think they are? These are the thoughts that haunt us after cases like this. These are the questions that have no easy answers, but that's why we continue documenting these stories, so that you know, so that you are prepared, so that if one day you hear that whisper in the dark, if you feel that invisible presence, you know you are not alone, that this has happened before, and it will happen again. If this story impacted you, if it made you look at the shadows in your room a little more closely, leave a like. This helps us continue bringing these stories to you. In the comments, tell us, do you believe in demonic possession? Have you experienced something inexplicable? Have you ever felt that something was wrong with someone close to you, but couldn't explain what? We want to hear your story, and if you want more cases like this, more stories that will make you question reality, subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Because every week, we bring a new account, a new mystery, a new terror. But before you go, I leave you with one last thought. Are you alone right now? Are you sure? Look around, pay attention to the sounds in your house, that creak, that whisper of the wind, that shadow in the corner of your eye. Are you sure you're alone? Sleep well, if you can. Until the next account.